How's it going, guys? Todd from Toddtronics. Sorry it's been a little while. Unfortunately, there was a little bit of an accident in the studio, and there was an electrical problem that ended up with me frying my camera, my lens, and all of my new attachments. So I've been slowly rebuilding the pieces, buying a new camera, buying new lenses, microphones, and things like that in order to continue making videos for you guys. So I appreciate the patience. I did want to make a video about this device here today. This is the BatleXP G350. Now, I wasn't originally intending on making a video on this device. However, one showed up at my door, and after using it for some time, I was actually thoroughly impressed. So I'm going to cut over to the overhead footage where we can take a look a little bit further into the device. But thank you guys so much for your patience. So this is the BatleXP G350, and I gotta say, getting it in the hands, it feels very familiar. Like this 100% feels like an Anbernic, which is kind of interesting, but we have some differences here, like a downward firing speaker as opposed to a front-facing speaker. This is just like a little fake grill here. And if we go along on the side, it almost feels exactly the same as an Anbernic when you look at things like the volume rocker and even the placement of the SD cards, all the way down to the side here where we have our second SD card slot along with our power and reset buttons. Now, one thing I noticed that stood out different to me was the location of the charge/OTG port being at the top, as well as the headphone jack, which I think might be an interesting choice. And aesthetically, things like the D-pad and all of the face buttons, everything here is just really calling back to Anbernic to me. And it's just convenient timing that they haven't released a handheld in a few months. It seems like they may be trying to recapture the market with a more budget-oriented device where they can experiment with a different chipset, maybe a little bit of tweaking of their operating systems. But I gotta say that in general, I'm really impressed by the BatleXP. We got this nice little sloping going on the back here for the triggers, and they feel really good to push in, not overly noisy and not hard to click in, which feels great. And probably one other standout feature that I really love on this is the quality of the plastic. A lot of these cheaper handhelds tend to go for like a really shiny textured plastic. This one here is very matted, not too rough to the touch, but definitely going to reject fingerprints, which I always appreciate. Next up, I kind of wanted to compare it to a few other handhelds on the market, starting with the R36S by Games Console. Now, this was the previous budget handheld king. However, I will say that this one definitely shows its price. Everything from the D-pad to all the face buttons and everything just feeling absolutely horrible. The quality of the plastic and the screen, just nothing that I would be super impressed by today's standard. I will say that if you were trying to get by on a budget, maybe give this to a kid or something like this, it had a reason for existing, but just about everything on this device feels really awful, even going to these terrible back buttons here. And it's kind of funny to think that we really appreciated something like this at its price point when it released, but now with things like the BatleXP coming out, it really shakes up things in that department. But for what it's worth, even at the time of this recording, the R36S is actually even cheaper than ever before, so it is still cheaper than the BatleXP. However, I don't think that I could still recommend it to anybody. Now, I wanted to quickly compare it to my first twin-stick vertical handheld, the RG353V. Now, this device here is a little bit more expensive, coming in around like $100 to $120, but it does have double the RAM and the ability to boot into Android, so there's a reason for it. But I really just wanted to compare it on a looks alone basis. Now, to compare it to a handheld that I often recommend to people, this is the Anbernic RG35XX Plus, and this one does have Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and HDMI, where the BatleXP does not. However, there are a lot of similarities, even things like the D-pad being near identical, which I thought was an interesting thing to notice. However, I will say one thing that I really appreciate is this one has a lot of rattle that goes on with it. However, if you take a listen here to the BatleXP, it's near silent. And though I'm not entirely sure what the back end is for this device, there's no doubt for the front end that they have chosen to go with Emulation Station, which I am a big fan of, both from an aesthetic and a functional standpoint. Being able to use Emulation Station is good for beginners because you can go in and set all kinds of different configurations right from within the front end itself. That way you don't have to dig into the RetroArch settings. Being able to go in on a per system basis and set things like your aspect ratio and even things like shaders is really helpful. And personally, as someone who's been using Emulation Station for a while, there's a lot of settings that I just go ahead and set up. Things like auto save and load save states. And you are going to also use this menu for lots of different things. Things like your system settings are going to be where you're going to find your brightness adjustment and things like that. So it's just very familiar to a lot of us that have been using emulation devices for quite some time. And another feature of Emulation Station that I've loved throughout the years, especially when gifting devices or making them for other people, is kiosk mode. So in the system settings, if you enable kiosk mode, it's going to basically make this so it's a little more friendly for people that would accidentally maybe hit a setting or change something that would mess up the way that they use the device. It's just a nice foolproof way of making this a gift that you can give to someone where they're not going to be calling you at 2 in the morning asking you for help. Moving into gaming, this thing is really, really comfortable when it comes to D-pad fighting games. I played a little bit of Street Fighter 3 and I had zero problem pulling off all of my special moves. Another thing to note that is similar to the Anbernic RG35XX Plus is there's a little bit of a rounded edge to the D-pad itself, which makes it really nice. It doesn't feel like it's going to be digging into the skin at all, as opposed to some other handhelds on the market, especially in the budget area. And it is very accurate with those pivots, like I said, and the face buttons and back triggers all feel really good to push in. And honestly, one of the things I love the most about this device is the 3.5-inch display. Now, there's a ton of different handhelds that use a 640 by 480 3.5-inch IPS. However, they all vary a little bit on colors and brightness, and this one here takes the cake. It has great color saturation, and the total peak brightness on this is really, really high, which is really good for playing in an outdoor environment. And off camera, I did do some comparison testing to all of my devices with 3.5-inch screens, and this one was my favorite out of all of them. And performance-wise, I would expect up to PlayStation 1 with this device, and having Dreamcast, PSP, and N64 as a bonus system, where sometimes you're going to be able to have a great experience depending on the game, and other times maybe not so much. Unfortunately, another thing I wanted to point out is the analog sticks on this device behave much more like an 8-way joystick on something like an arcade than an actual true analog input. As you can see, they are snapping to the cardinal directions. It's something that we've seen before on a lot of cheaper handhelds, specifically those from Anbernic. So those that were hoping that maybe this device would be different, but maybe in the future we'll see something from the community that can remedy this. But at the time of recording on the stock operating system, this is what we're working with. Now, as to how that would translate into real-life gaming, it's just going to depend on a game-by-game basis. Something like this here, Sonic Adventure 2, it can be a little bit difficult to get Sonic to move exactly where you want him to because it is so snappy. It feels like it's kind of an all-or-nothing to either direction kind of situation. And it doesn't help that whatever is going on here in the actual operating system appears to be adding quite a lot of frame skip, probably more than necessary for this particular chipset. But again, just something I wanted to point out because it is something that other people are going to be asking about. But if I had to guess, just like many other budget devices, I have a strong feeling that this device will continue to get better and better as time goes on with more community support, things like custom firmware and patches, and people just really getting their hands on this thing. And actually, at the time of recording, there was quite a few different custom firmware options available, but I didn't want to cover those in this video because I wanted to focus more on what the device is as it comes out of the box. And if you found this video helpful at all, please consider giving me a sub down below and liking the video. I am a brand new channel. I've only been at this for a few months, but I do have a heavy goal of trying to get to 10K by the end of the year. So if you could help me along with that journey, I'd greatly appreciate it. Make sure you guys comment any questions you have down below, anything that you'd like to see in maybe a follow-up video for this device, because I do plan on making more content with it as time goes on. But other than that, I just wanted to thank everybody that made it this far, and we'll see you in the next one.